this is a much smaller, neater text than this. Anyway, and this is from the Codex Alexandrinus, which we'll be talking about in a minute. So there are three important uncials. Now, remember, when the researchers and archaeologists and the manuscript hunters, when they found these, they could identify pretty easily just based on the type of text about when those were originally written. So the original uncials were those large block letters like I showed you. So they would be like this, and then later ones up into like 1000 AD 1000 would be looking more like this. The first of those I'm going to talk about is the Vatican manuscript. So these, we're still talking about the New Testament. All this is about that. Dates to about the 300s, and it was resided in the Vatican since 1481. Now, nobody knows how it actually got there. So if it was written in the 300s, then it was circulating around for 1,000 years. It was moving around. So it ended up there. Some of the folks say that it is as early as 1448. Whatever it is, that manuscript itself had been around for a really long time. This one is the oldest of the three, and it has the purest text, which means that there were fewer, I would say, discrepancies between it and when you go back to the ancient Hebrew. Okay, and of course it's in Greek. So they, as early as 1553, they were doing research on it, studying it, allowing people to come in and look at it. Napoleon stole it during the Napoleonic Wars and took it off to Paris, and then after that was all over, then it was returned to the Vatican. Okay, and it's still there. They have it stored away somewhere. And this is interesting. We're going to talk more about Tischendorf here in a minute, but Tischendorf was an interesting guy, and the Vatican let him and all of the scholars, but they would give him short periods of time, 6 hours, go in to study, and this is the original codex. Okay, so he would be in there, and they would thumb through the pages and everything and look at it. Well, the rule was you couldn't take any writing materials in there. So Tischendorf got caught. So he copied like 20 pages of it. He got caught, and they barred him from looking at it for a while. And somehow he got access again, and in 1867 he published the first complete document of the Vatican manuscript. Now, how he did that, I'm not sure. I've read a lot about this, and it never did really say whether he actually got permission to it. Surely that's what happened, that he got permission to actually copy it down. But in 1868, then, there were improved copies, and then the photographic facsimiles were made of it, and then those were made available to all of the researchers. So that was like in 1890.
And this is the Old Testament, or the New Testament as we know it. This is the right chapter, verse.
Yes, that is not what this is. This is the New Testament, and it is written in Greek. What I find interesting, this is the neat part about the facsimiles. If you look at this book, it looks like one of my books where I've spilled coffee on it. Somebody was here researching, and this is a copy. They got all of the stains. There, you can see here, down here, there were corrections. And the most interesting thing is all of these notes around the margins. It's like, how did those get there? Because the original text is over here. And so over that 1,000 years, there were notes being made in that codex. And this, and of course, this is a copy. But the fascinating thing is, I find, is the stains. You see the dog-eared pages and stuff. And anyway, it's so that is a picture of the Vatican manuscript.
I'm surprised that you see a naked hand.
Yeah.
Well, it's a copy, though.
I know, but they still should have gloves on.
Eh, It's a copy. Good question. I don't know. This may be a newer copy, facsimile, so who knows?
Look at the book binding, shows it's new.
Or down here, right, that's much newer. Yeah. Yeah. So then we have the Alexandrian manuscript. So this is one that was in Alexandria, Egypt, and the Greek patriarch of Constantinople, Cyril Lucar, carried it off to Constantinople in 1621. He gifted that to the British, this Thomas Rowe, who was the ambassador, and as a gift for James I. And of course, James I died before the gift was given to him, so it was given to King Charles I in 1621. The king then gave it to the Royal Library. But in 1731, the library burned down. And the head librarian, from what I read, was running around in his night clothes trying to save this stuff. And one of the things that he saved was the Alexandrian manuscript. Okay, after that, then it was moved over to the British Museum. More about those guys here in a minute. And it's still there. And they broke it up into 4 parts. Now, this is another part that I find interesting. This is the people side of it. That copy is appended by a letter from Clement, who knew Paul, to the church at, where is it? Yeah, it's in there. Anyway, Corinth. Thank you. Okay, so it is the original. It is the oldest non-biblical Christian document to be written that's in existence today, and it was written in around AD 95. So those folks we eventually became the popes and such, are called the apostolic fathers. He was executed, of course, by Trajan, and so beyond 100 AD there was nothing. But anyway, it has been validated that he wrote that, and it is the earliest Christian document. Okay. So back to the actual document itself, the Alexandrian document. So there are some differences between that and the original, than the Sinaitic manuscripts in the Vatican. So there are different. The lettering is a little bit different. They use the colors, and so you can see the marks of these different scribes in there. And we talked about that, where the different scribes had basically different styles, and that shows up in these differences between those manuscripts. So it was dated back to the 400s, AD 400s. So that's pretty old. And again, because of the textual features, right? So the Greek was written in the uncials and the oldest uncials. Then there was various qualities of work, and of course you would expect that the different scribes had, some of them were more attentive to their work than others, and so there was different qualities of work. and it shows up in a document like this. This is one of the pages from that. And I put this note in here. You can tell by the time frame what actually the type of uncial that was written in. And notice that there's the columns again, and there's actually still no periods and punctuation marks and stuff like that in this text. The other interesting thing is this is when this kind of stuff, the flowers and the real pretty colors and stuff like that started to show up, and it shows up here in this document. Anyway, so that's one of the pages of it. It is not a complete document, but it has there's parts of it that are missing. Anyway, it's still around. Okay. And now we get to our manuscript hunters. And these folks are actually very interesting. This gentleman here, his name is, he started off Konstantin Tischendorf, German. He was educated in Germany at the University of Leipzig, and he studied theology and philosophy. And one of the things that he had a passion for getting to the original documents that made up the Bible. And so he spent his life searching for these older documents. And his ultimate goal was to find the original text in the original hand. Okay, and of course he didn't, but that was the goal. And of course he was always looking for a sponsor, somebody to pay for his trips where he was doing research and stuff like that. So he did a lot of traveling. He did a first edition of the New Greek Testament, and then he did a second edition. And this is when, and I have this on another slide. He published his critical principles on how you actually go about doing textual criticism. And he was one of the first textual critics who actually formalized a method of doing that. So there were a lot of these folks around, and there were a lot of manuscript hunters, but he was the first one to actually write it down and formalize the technique. And I have those here. I'll show them to you in a minute. He did the palimpsest, the Codex Ephemerae Syri, and so I mentioned that the last time, but anyway, and that was a palimpsest. So he was the first textual critic that was able to look under the codex had a sermon or something like that on top of it, and he was able to decipher the stuff that was underneath. Okay, so just for a reference, there were no X-rays. Okay, so it was an arduous task for him to sit there and you're trying to figure out what's underneath that text. So it was all done by hand. So it's pretty amazing in and itself. Anyway, he was off to these other places looking for a sponsor, and that's when it brings us to the Codex Sinaiticus. Okay, so he did find a sponsor, and it was the King of Saxony. And so basically in 1844, he heads off to St. Catherine's in the Sinai. Okay, so this was not hop on an airplane and fly down there. This was you cross the English Channel to France, you go down to Marseille, you catch a ship to Alexandria, and during his time, you got barged around to Cairo. Then you crossed over to You did. That one just slipped out. Anyway, you're over in the Sinai Desert, and then you either get barged down to near St. Catherine's, and then you got a camel, and then it was like a 5 or 6 day trip over to St. Catherine's. Okay, so it was non-trivial to get there. And so in 1844, he traveled there, and he discovered 43 pages of the Codex Sinaiticus. Now, it turns out that you got to love the monks. But anyway, those 43 pages were in a trash bin, and it was getting ready to be burned. Right? And Tischendorf saw them, and he immediately recognized that this is something really important. He got all excited, and the monks go, now wait a minute, what is going on here? Because they had like storerooms filled with these documents. And so somehow he talked him into letting him take those 43 documents, and he went back, he went home, and then he published them. And basically it was, I think he called it the Codex Federico Augustinus. And as late as 2011, those were on display at the University of Leipzig in Germany. So those exist still, but they're part of this original document. So he goes back in 1853, didn't find anything. Okay, so remember, he's poking around inside those storerooms there, and there's a lot of stuff in there. So he's looking specifically for something to tie up with that. Okay. And then in 1859, the Tsar of Russia sponsored him and gave him money to go back to look for the rest of this document. And he heads off, or documents similar. So you roll forward. He's made his way to St. Catherine's. He's been there for a long time looking for this, and it's like no joy. He has not found anything. And on his last day, he's there, and a monk comes up to him and says, I too have read the Septuagint. And von Tischendorf's ears go, you say what? And so this monk takes him over to his room, a cell, I guess would be called a cell, and wrapped up and placed on a shelf is the rest of this document. And, okay, but there's more about St. Catherine. We'll get to that in a minute. So anyway, so Tischendorf borrows it, and he takes it to his room, and he's studying it. But the next day, they mount the camels, and they head for Cairo, right? And so now he's trying to figure out, how can I copy this thing? So turns out that the head monk of St. Catherine's was in Cairo. And so he worked a deal with the leader of St. Catherine's to get one of the Bedouins who had been with them with camels to go back to St. Catherine's. So this is like a 5 or 6 day trip. Get that codex and bring it back to Cairo so he could study it and copy it. And he let him do that. So they had a Bedouin go back, came back to Cairo. Now, this is rough country, right? I mean, that guy could have got his throat cut or anything out there. So this was non-trivial to get there. He comes back, Tischendorf copies it, and then he publishes it. Okay? Well, the Tsar says, you know what? I would really like to have that original. And so over some period of time, and I ran into some difficulties with the timelines. We're doing other research in the book so they don't match up. But at some point, the monks, and there were dissenters among the monks that did not want that codex to leave there. But at some point, they decided the head monk said, yes, we'll send it to and let the Tsar keep it for a while. And there was a promise that they would return it. And of course, that never has not happened yet. Okay, so the Tsar made 327 facsimile copies of it, and he gave 100 of them to Tischendorf. Okay, and to do with whatever he wanted, so he could sell them, and it was kind of a payment kind of thing. Okay, and even more interesting is when the communists took over Russia, right? They killed all of the Tsars, all of the family, right? Murdered them, and now they're running things, and they discover that codex, and it's like, okay, so now what do we do with this? Okay, because they're atheists, and so. Very practical. They sold it, and they sold it to the British Museum for $500,000, and it's still there. So the Codex Alexandrinus, the Codex Sinaiticus are in the British Museum, and the Vatican manuscript, of course, is in the Vatican, and those documents still exist. This is the complete New Testament. And you can see, well, and of course you can't really see the details of it, but the columns, the way it was written. Just as an aside, that monastery was built in the mid-500s by Justinian, and it was a fort basically built out in the middle of the Sinai desert. Okay. And it was protecting the Byzantine Empire's interest down that way. And of course, they filled it with monks. The thing I find interesting is that there were a lot of documents there, and why there? How did those documents find their way there, to that place? And if you think about it, God is not going to let his word be destroyed. That's just the way it is. And so this place is a key place for all of the Bible texts that we have today. And it was stored, and the monks, I mean, they didn't know what to do with that stuff. It was just there, and it was in rooms. And so these people, these hunters, understood what they were looking at. And so those documents exist today because of those people who went searching for it. Yes?
That's also in the area of the burning bush.
It is. I was just going to mention that. So supposedly, St. Catherine's was founded on the location where Moses encountered the burning bush. Now, whether that is true or not, I don't know. But anyway, there's a lot of goings on there that are, I would say, supernatural. It has got to be something like that. By the way, I looked at how do you actually get to St. Catherine? It's still there. You can actually drive there. But there are some, you have to take some, there are some toll roads, and then there are some ferries. You got to drive through Turkey and down through Syria, and then down through Lebanon, and then you make your way into the Sinai Desert. And so, but there's actually a road that you can drive it. Yeah. Anyway, that's just additional information. No extra charge. Okay. So I mentioned that Tischendorf, the Von got attached to Tischendorf because of the Tsar. He made him a noble. So originally it was Tischendorf, and the Tsar said, well, you're nobility now, so they put the Von in front. Anyway, that's where that came from. So these are the basic rules for textual criticism. And textual criticism, the goal is to make sure that the newer and newer texts, when there are new editions of it, actually match the intent of the writer the original writers, okay? Now, there are errors, and that's why these people have jobs to do this sort of thing. But the thing is the message never changes. The message is true from God. It's always the same. There may be spelling errors, there may be those kinds of things. That's what they look for. Okay. But anyway, so these are the basic rules, and notice the Father's word again. But anyway, so they try to go back to as far back in time that they can to get the purest text that they can to make sure that the current copies and texts match that with the actual phrases, words. For instance, my New Living Translation, which I like, I prefer this above all of the others. It's a word-for-word translation, and they went back to the original text to do that. Now, I didn't know that when Shelley bought me that Bible, but now I know it, and I'll never get rid of it, or I'll have another one. Yes, sir.
Just a question on the higher criticism. Later, like 1800s, when atheism was sweeping through Europe, they used higher criticism as a goal of really tearing the Bible apart.
Absolutely. And I see that one of my big sources, which I really like, is Wikipedia. And so when I do research, okay, so do not use Wikipedia to do theological kinds of things. That's a bad idea, okay? But for history and the historians to put information in there, it's very good. So you got to be careful. But I see that even now, and I bought a book on where the Bible came from. It's a different one, but it was by a professor at Cambridge in London, right? And it was just tearing the whole thing apart. And I got to a point where I just couldn't read it anymore. So I just set it aside. Yeah, but that, you're right.
It's like deconstruction today.
It is. It is. Yep. So anyway, so von Tischendorf is credited with doing this and publishing these things. And then there is a whole community that does this kind of work. Now there are other New Testament manuscripts, and they've been classed into different types. So the Alexandrian is associated with the Sinaitic manuscripts, so those would be very accurate copies of the original books in the New Testament. There's the Byzantine associated with the Middle Ages, and they can tell because the uncials migrated toward the minuscules. And they can tell when those actually happened in the Middle Ages. And then the Western uncials they have textual variations. And so when the textual critics look at those, they do not use those as a major source, but they only reference them. So, and the reason is because they have significant variations in the text. So these Bibles, these modern Bibles, are probably based going all the way back to the original Greek manuscripts and the original Hebrew. Okay. So these are some of the other important New Testament manuscripts. This Codex Ephraim, it's a palimpsest. I misspelled it. I finally caught that. It's supposed to be a P in there. But anyway, there were 38 sermons of Ephraim, and this is the one that von Tischendorf deciphered. Was this one right here, and there's the Codex Bezae. You can read these, and the different types. So they wouldn't use this one. There's 6th century Paul's letters, including Hebrews. There's the Codex Laudianus, so it was gifted to Oxford. the 8th century Codex of the Gospels, and it's located in Paris. And the minuscules are the most prolific of all of the ancient texts. And there are like 2,800 of them. So they date as far back as the 800s in the 9th century. And the Gospels, the fragments, passages, and there are, and what they found, these hunters find either pages, there'll be fragments, they very rarely find entire documents. So the three, the Vatican manuscript, the Codex Sinaiticus, and the Codex Alexandrinus are really important because they were large documents and books, codexes. The lectionaries are selected verses out of the Bible, and they were basically, a preacher would have done something like that, where they would be read in public, something like that. And they found a lot of those. And then written on papyrus. So the last time I said, well, papyrus is not going to last very long. Well, papyrus, they've been finding papyrus documents, and some of them are back to the Dead Sea, some Dead Sea Scrolls are some of them. But there have been some papyrus documents that have been found that are New Testament documents. And so new techniques is they can't unroll them, but they scan them like with a CT scan, and then electronically they unroll them. And then they'll be able to see the text in there. So I've read some things about that. And so there are new things, and next time I talk, I will talk about some of the real latest finds, and it'll blow you away. I'm not going to, that's a teaser, by the way. Okay. Yes, ma'am. I'm going to talk about that here in a minute.
Okay, so it is tied into this.
It is, but not specifically like that, but there's a, well, I think we're ready to move on. Let me get to that. There we go. So these ancient versions of the New Testament, so in the early church, to spread the story of Christ, there had to have been copies made, right? So we know that. And they had to be translated into various languages, even though Greek was the predominant language in that region and all over the Middle East. There are still people who did not speak or read Greek. And so there were lots and lots of translations being done. Some of them good, some of them not so good, okay? And some of these translations go back as far as the 200s. So remember, John was writing his stuff in the late AD 90s. So this stuff was, this is about 100 years old, some of these documents. They've been found as far away as China. And so those documents really spread out all over the place. Okay. There are three versions of the Syriac. So these were up in Syria, in that area, and they are the Diatessaron, which would be focused on the four Gospels, the Old Syriac, which this is what I'm going to talk more about this one in a minute, and then the Peshitta, which would be the simple Syriac translation. So what they did was they took the New Testament, was written in Greek, so it was translated from Greek into these different dialects of the Syriac. And those copies spread out all over the place. Okay. So now we're going to get introduced to two ladies, and they are twin sisters, and Agnes and Margaret Smith, born in 1843, and their dad was he worked for the British government, and he was an amateur linguist. The mom died a few weeks after the babies were born, and so Dad raised the girls. They were educated in private schools. Ultimately, they spoke like 12 or 14 languages between them. And so they just had a knack for languages. And of course, part of it was Dad really encouraged that probably. They traveled extensively throughout Europe, and so they were used to traveling. When Dad died, he left them a large inheritance, so he was a well-to-do man, and the ladies inherited quite a bit of money. So they were able to fund themselves when they went off on their trips. Okay, they attended the Presbyterian Church at Caltham Road, and initially fluent in German, French, Italian, and then they gained those other languages over their lifetime. They had this thing for Greek Orthodoxy, and so they end up going down to Athens, and they ended up hooking up with some of the monks down there that had been visiting Athens, and they arranged a trip to go to St. Catherine's. Okay, so again, two ladies in mid-1800s traveling across the desert, camels. One of the sisters got injured. They got caught in sandstorms, all kinds of things, and so it was quite the adventure for them. But anyway, they both had been married. Both were widows, and so both were married, and then shortly after they were married, the husbands died. Not at the same time, of course, but anyway, they over a period of time. That would be like, okay, something's going on here. But anyway, Agnes started studying Syriac, and so she was inspired because there were some Syriac texts that had been discovered, and the name of that one was the Apology of Aristides, and it was found at St. Catherine's. So there were other hunters, and they basically kind of converging on St. Catherine's. So they head off to the Sinai. And what they discovered was the earliest version of the old Syriac Gospels. Okay, so it's the Gospels of 4 books at St. Catherine's, and it was a palimpsest. And so they were able to decipher what was underneath that. Now, the neat thing is, it's not on the slide, they found that underneath a collapsed roof in one of the rooms where there had been a fire. So there was a fire, the roof collapsed, and they were digging around behind there, and they found that document that was unburned. Okay, so and basically the overwritten part was Lives of Holy Women, authored by John the Recluse in AD 799. Okay, and so they were able to decipher that the Gospels were underneath that text. It's just pretty amazing. That's the sisters, and they never did go to Cambridge, but they were honored all over the place. And so, and this is one of the documents they found. And they traveled extensively in the Middle East, and they purchased 1,700 different documents. So they are huge contributors to the ancient texts. And so anyway, this is one of the things that they found. If you're interested in something that's actually pretty neat, there were these high school girls here recently that put together a YouTube video. It's about 10 minutes of Agnes and Margaret Smith uncovering the Codex. Now, they say that they found the Codex Sinaiticus, and that is not correct, but it doesn't matter. They have the story of these two women here who are traveling in the Sinai desert, and it's on YouTube. It's the neatest thing. Okay. All right. And this is a sample of a Peshitta. This is what it would look like. And beautifully written. The script is very neat. And you see a lot of the color there. And then this is a Arabic diatessaron, and this was done in the 11th century, so that would be around 1000, 1000, and it was translated from Syriac to Arabic. Okay, so we have Greek translated to Syriac, translated into Arabic. That's what this is. Okay.
Tell me the lady's last name again.
Smith.
Well, that's easy.
I know, that's a hard one to remember. They're pretty amazing, though. They're just, I mean, it's the kind of stuff that you would make a Indiana Jones movie out. That was their adventures. That was the kind of life they lived. Pretty amazing. Okay. Continuing on here. Oh, I'm almost done. There's the Coptic versions. Now, the Egyptians, remember, they wrote in hieroglyphics, right? And around the 500s, they adopted the Greek alphabet for writing Egyptian. So they have the Egyptian language. Eventually, they wrote it with the Greek alphabet, and that is known as Coptic. And there are different versions of it, and they find these documents around, so they know when and where they were written, whether there was the Upper Nile or Lower Nile, in the different regions, whether it was around Alexandria or Thebes. And if you look on a map, you can see basically where those are. This is interesting. By 180, AD 180, Paul's letters had been translated into Latin. Okay? And remember, when Paul wrote his letters to Rome, they were written in Greek. Okay? So eventually, they got translated. And the interesting thing is how do they know that? Well, there were trials during persecutions of the Christians in Carthage, North Africa, and there were detailed proceedings of the court proceedings.